infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Well, I would like to, if we could, go in succession. And I want to start off by saying, first of all, thank you so much for getting in touch. I know that these are encounters that you really haven't shared a whole lot, which I can completely understand. And you've had 20 years of experiences spanning 3 different houses. And you got in touch with me because you feel like this thing is, or things, it's starting to try to isolate you guys. And it sounds like you've just plain old had enough. And yeah, as I've said many times on the show, it's all fun and games when you can go to an active location and then go home and leave it behind. But it's completely different when it's happening in your own home. And it sounds like it's happening very, very often to you guys. And if it is just one thing, and I'm not assuming that it is, but if it is, it's manifesting in a lot of different ways. So,
absolutely.
When do you remember all of this starting for you?
It started at 2000 in 2003. My husband had, I guess you would say, got the calling to be a minister, and we had actually moved, I'll just say, in a specific location in Kentucky. And I am from Kentucky. We wound up at a Bible college, and we were there for a few years. And I've never really been, prior to that, really someone who, I guess you could say I was a skeptic. You know, I mean, I was interested, but I have a skeptical side. My father was more of a science-minded person, so I just really didn't, I was kind of on the fence about it. I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought, but it was in 2003, right before we were ready to leave the college. My husband had graduated. We were getting ready to leave. And that spring, we started to have some very interesting, unexplained things happened. And it basically started with the lights in our bathroom, some shadows. Oddly, one evening, this is really how it started. We were upstairs, and my daughter, she might have been 2 or 3, of course, she wanted to sleep with mom and dad. And I was sitting up reading because I do have difficulty with sleep. I was reading, and all of a sudden I heard, it was almost, I can't describe it any other way except it was almost like in surround sound. It was circling the room. And it was the weirdest, it sounded almost like chanting in a language that I'd never heard before. And I thought, like I always think, you're losing your mind. Or we were actually dorm parents, which was scary enough to college boys. So I thought, it has to be the boys. Something's going, they're doing this. So I asked my husband, will you please go out into the hallway and see what they're into this time? And he actually stepped out, and this was incredible enough. There was nothing going on. The hallways were clear, couldn't hear anything. So I thought, at that point, okay, you're just imagining this stuff. This is just imagination. So I kind of slunk down into the bed. That moment, I felt a depression in the bed next to me. It felt just like someone had sat down next to me. And I looked over. My husband was asleep. He had not moved. My daughter had not moved. I actually got a little bit apprehensive at that point, and am I really crazy? Is this really so? I kind of flipped over on my stomach at that point, and it felt like if you would take your fist and hit a pillow, how it kind of does that poof thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you can feel that pressure, and you could feel the depression. That happened then. Well, still, I thought, this has got to be your imagination. There has to be a good explanation for this. A few days later, it wasn't long after that, I started to hear my name. It felt like it was almost directly in my ear. I mean, it was that clear, as if someone was speaking in my ear. Once again, I said, okay, you're dreaming. You're in between dream and awake. This is something that you're imagining. So just let it go. Let it go. At one point, I even heard something say, get up. And so I kind of just let that go. It happened again one morning, and my daughter was about 8 years old at the time. And she got up that morning, and I can remember her coming to me, and she looked up and she said, Mommy, she said, somebody said my name in my ear last night.
Mm.
And it was at that point that I realized, well, we may have a problem here. That kind of progressed with, we started to have flickering lights when we were in the bathroom. And, first thing I said was have maintenance come down here, check these lights. We had them down there 3 times. They couldn't find anything wrong with the lights. And, when you have kids, you're always, oh, there's going to be a fire. It's electrical. We need to have it checked out. So we did 3 times, and they couldn't find anything. There was one evening that I remember that my husband was sitting on the floor, and he was trying to brush our daughter's teeth. She was a toddler, like I said, so that was scary within itself. But I was at the sink, and I saw a shadow move past the doorway, and it passed over them enough that I could tell it was a shadow. It was so obvious that I thought, well, which didn't really make any sense at the time, because it would have been obvious that I would have seen then. I thought that one of our kids had headed to the master bedroom. So I, of course, go out and look, and we don't see anything. That was a few of the first instances, that I remember. We had this is where it really, really got scary for me, especially as a mother. We had a stair. There were stairs there. We put a gate at the top of the stairs, so if the kids were up there playing, the gate was closed. And we'd always told them, don't leave your toys next to the top of the stairs. Don't play around the stairs. I was in the kitchen downstairs at the time, and I heard this racket coming down the stairs. It was just boop, 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 and there's my middle daughter at the bottom of the stairs. And I just jump up or run into, I'm sorry. I just heard that again.
Did you?
Yes. Yeah. It's like something's cutting in, and it's very garbled.
Wow, I didn't hear it at all. I hope
Yeah.
it's going to be in the recording, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'm on mute because I'm just kind of taking notes. That is very strange.
Yeah.
Oh.
This has happened several times. It's actually happened once with Keith.
Was he able to hear it?
I can't remember if he did or not.
Oh, that's okay.
I know that he did tell me that it happens to him quite regularly, but I do remember that it was very clear, and it said something to the effect that I should not be talking to him or stop talking to him.
Oh boy. Yeah.
This has happened through my car speakers when I was trying to talk to my husband on Bluetooth. And this was just last year, and it was the most horrific sounding voice. And, the first thing, well, at least I do anyway, is, okay, let's come up with a rational explanation for this first. But I really couldn't find any. And then I was on the phone actually in the second house with my best friend, who definitely is very skeptical about these things. I don't really talk to her much at all because she kind of shuts down. I was actually talking to her and her husband, and we were on speakerphone. Her husband was in the kitchen, and she was in the living room. And all of a sudden she says, "Did you hear that?" And I, what? What did you hear? And she said, there was a man laughing, and it came through so clearly that, and her husband was shouting in the back of the kitchen. I heard it. I could hear it. And, I didn't hear it, but they did. So this isn't uncommon. And that's the thing about it. I mean, if it were just us having these experiences, it would probably be, I would still be even more skeptical than I already am.
Right.
Still skeptical. It's 20 years later, and there isn't a day where I don't doubt my sanity. So, but anyway.
Yeah, so this thing doesn't even like when you and your husband talk about it, let alone if you try to talk about it outside the family. Because the interesting thing here is we're not over the phone. This is over an internet StreamYard link. So if whatever this is able to kind of burst in whenever it feels like it. So yeah, I'm hoping that is somewhere in the midst of this recording.
Yes, it is. We've just had some, like I said, I try to come up with a rational explanation. Is it some sort of a frequency that we are picking up or things like that? But most usually that explanation would be even more unreasonable than the possibility.
Right.
So anyway, if I can remember where, I think I was talking
your
about
daughter's
the stairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and like I said, I haven't had any sleep, so I'm kind of, you'll have to, my executive function isn't very well today, so.
You're fine.
But anyway, I could hear that thud coming, and of course I ran over there to her, and she got up, and she had a red mark on her neck, which it could have been from the fall, but she said, Mommy, she said, it felt like something pushed me. And I said, I looked up there and I thought, that gate should have been shut. I mean, it stays shut. And those kids had not ever fallen down the stairs since we've been there. And at that point, we've been there probably about 4 years in the apartment. And this is the really scary part. And I mean, I was just beside myself because of this. It wasn't 5 minutes later, and my youngest one came down. So in 4 years, they had never fallen down those steps, and within 5 minutes, 2 of them had. So I got them up, checked them out, made sure that they were okay. And, they were okay, just a little bit shaken up. I go back upstairs, check the gate. Is there anything wrong with the gate? Is there something wrong with the latch? Once again, have you been next to the steps? Look for toys. Nothing like that. So at that point, I was really starting to worry. Really starting to worry. It wasn't long after that they had a little playroom back behind their bedroom. It was a pretty good sized apartment for being in a dorm. It was actually a very nice apartment. But we began to smell something that I can only describe as rotten. And, they had a little play school kitchen, and the first thing you start to do is, okay, where have they taken the food? Where is it rotting? They've been up here playing with their food on the play school kitchen. They've left food here, so we're digging around in the little stove area and lift it up and look under there. The only thing that we had at the time was like a wardrobe in there for their clothing, a little play school set for them to play with. So we even moved the wardrobe to see if maybe a mouse had gotten in there or something had died. We never could find anything. We rented a commercial carpet cleaner. We couldn't get that smell out of there. We never could. And I thought, okay, we live in a boys' dorm at a college. It could be stinky feet. It could be a number of things. So,
And this is a constant smell?
It's a constant smell. I know that we shampooed that carpet, I think, at least 3 times. Couldn't get it out of there. The walls were almost like plaster. It was some sort of a very hard plaster material, so I don't believe it was anything that could have permeated like drywall. Drywall would probably absorb it, but I really don't think that this was the case. But we continued. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
We continued to shampoo. And one day it was gone. It was just gone. We don't know why. We don't know how. I thought that was very strange. And we had, no doubt a few more. I call them mundane now because we've dealt with them so long. And that's a crazy thing to say. But we hear so much, and, cabinets open, footsteps. That I was actually talking to Keith one night, and he had received a recording from me, and this was back in the first house that we lived in. And he said, well, I think I hear cabinets opening and shutting. And I said, Keith, we hear it so much now. I said, as long as they're not in my candy stash, I don't care.
And Shanna, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and let everybody know who Keith is and who he is to you guys and how long of a relationship you guys have had with him.
Okay. Keith Johnson. Keith is a demonologist. Some people may know him, Ghost Hunters. He was on, I think, the first and second seasons. A member of TAPS at the time. The way that I got to know Keith is that by the time we got to the second house, I thought, when we left the college, I thought, okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief. If there is something there, it's going to stay there. That's just the way that this works. It wasn't long after we got into the second house that we figured out, no, it didn't stay there. So having had no experience with anything like this before, and as I said, still kind of skeptical about it anyway, I actually caught Ghost Hunters on TV one night, and I thought, this is really going to be a long shot, but I'm going to see if I can't contact someone, because at the time, I don't think you really heard as much about paranormal investigation or paranormal teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually went online and I found Keith on the web. He had actually, at that time, had just started a message board. I think it was just pretty much, it had just started right then. So I go into the message board, and I think I'd start to talk a little bit about what's been going on. I contacted him, or he contacted me through the private messaging or whatever it was on there. And I just began to tell him some of the things that were happening, kind of kept him updated regularly. And I just want to say this about Keith. He has kept up with us for 20 years, and he is such a humble, gentle, patient person. I can call him about any time and say, this is going on, this is going on. And sometimes he will call. And at the last house that we were at, I will never forget this, because we were just in the middle of absolute turmoil, just absolute turmoil. Personally, the house was basically upside down. And he called one night, and my husband and I were actually arguing, which is something that prior to all the, the second house that we lived in, we just didn't do it. And a lot of people say that, but, I can vet it by the people who have always been around us. We have worked together as teachers. He taught right across the hallway from me. People would say, how do you get along? I mean, I can't imagine working with my husband. We loved working together. I mean, we're just best friends, but at the time it was absolutely horrific. But I can get to the next house. But Keith called and he said, are you guys okay? He said, I just had a premonition that something was wrong. And I just said, yes, it's very wrong. But he is, once again, one of the most gentle, humble people that I've ever met. He's very patient. I just can't say enough good about him. He's just a wonderful person. And I have literally never heard Keith say a bad word about anyone, when probably he could or would have the opportunity, but I've never heard him say a derogatory thing about anyone. But that's basically how we got to know Keith. And I do consider him a dear friend. And we exchanged Christmas cards. So, yeah, they're just really great people. And so is his wife, Sandra. So.
Yeah, it's good that you have an ally, as it's not an easy field to be in, especially once you get into the realm of being on television, and they were some of the earliest ones, as you mentioned, but I mean, it's not an easy field to be in, and you just get hammered on day and night, especially if you're on TV, even if you have the best of intentions. So that's really good to hear about he and his wife. I hope I get to meet him one of these days. I'm very familiar with him and his work.
Oh, you really will love him. Actually, I think I had mentioned to you that on Coast to Coast AM, I think it was the June 30th episode, that Keith had briefly mentioned us. Mm-hmm. He did not give away names. He's always been somewhat protective of us. He would never sell us out. I do know that after 20 years. He sticks by us. He probably has the opportunity to do that, but he never has. As a matter of fact, we had someone approach us through him who, no, I won't mention any names, but it was someone who previously had a show, a paranormal investigation show, and he had called Keith to ask him if he knew anyone who had a severe case that he could investigate. And Keith called me, of course, and he said, this is the person. They want to do a documentary. I want to talk to you about that first. And, at the time, and this was just last spring, I said, Keith, I just don't know at this point if I want to do this. I'm afraid what it could bring about. I don't want the stigma, because the experience itself, it can be injury enough. And sometimes when people get to know what's going on or who you are, it becomes insult to injury, the way that they react sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, that I just told Keith, I said, I don't know that I want it to be on that level. I don't know if I want so many people to know about this. So anyway, I've just made what could be a short story very long.
No, that's okay. You don't have to apologize. I'm the best when it comes to that kind of a thing, going on tangents. No, that's fine. Sometimes the tangents can produce things anyway, and I like them. Now, I may be jumping ahead here, and if I am, just tell me, and we'll pick back up, at the beginning of moving into the second house, and you thought it had left, or been left behind rather, but it hadn't. But has Keith ever come out to either of or any of your 3 homes where this stuff is going on, or has your contact only been over the phone with him?
It has been over the phone. Of course, Keith lives in Rhode Island. We're in Kentucky. He has said quite often that he really wants to get down here. And I think eventually that he will. He just has a lot of, he works full time. He has a big family commitment. They're just a very close-knit family, so it's very difficult. My daughter lives in Delaware. My oldest daughter lives in Delaware, and she never gets to come home. So, I can well imagine that it would be very difficult for Keith.
Yeah.
He really, really wants to. Keith has made several attempts to get us help. He has made contacts with people, and this sounds very sensational, but the people that he has talked to try to get us help are often met with obstacles of their own. I do know that one gentleman had a heart attack, and I can't remember exactly. I think that one had actually quit the paranormal field before they were supposed to get to us. So, and that could all very much be coincidence. But then again, sometimes I think, well, just how many coincidences do you have to have
Right.
Over the span of 20 years? But no, he hasn't been here. I would very much love to have him here. Just wonderful people. I can't say enough good things about them.
Yeah, so you guys get into, was that you? I heard a little whisper. I don't know if that was you starting to talk and I interrupted you or not.
Oh, no, that was not me.
Yeah, I just heard something now. This will be very interesting to go back and listen to. I will let you know when we do hang up what I end up hearing, and I will send it to you. Wow. Okay, that's strange. I hardly ever have that happen.
I'm in my art studio,
Uh-huh.
and this used to be my sanctuary. I would come in here if I couldn't sleep at night and paint. And I felt safe in here. Well, I don't come in here anymore. I'm in here right now because it's quiet. I can shut the door. Lately, I don't come in here anymore. I paint at the table in the kitchen where, the dogs and my husband are. I don't shut myself off in here anymore because I've had some experiences in here. Oh boy. We'll get to it when we get to this house, but I had a very rattling experience in here, and it's only been a couple of months ago. It just seems like it has ratcheted up since we've been here.
And that's a shame. Like you said, it used to be your sanctuary. That's a really sad phrase to now use, right? So, okay, so let's start at the beginning now. You're hoping that it got left behind at the apartment. We had the smells and footsteps and all this other stuff. I can only imagine you're feeling very relieved. You've moved, and lo and behold, it has not stayed behind. So what were some of the first things that you guys noticed at the second place?
The first things that happened, we have pets, and probably some people are going to laugh about them. We are animal lovers. We love animals, We have my daughter's dogs, and we actually rescued guinea pigs for a while. And we had a little guinea pig, of course, being the crazy guinea pig people, we had pretty fairly large cages. I had one that was actually big enough that I could get into it and clean it. So it was on the floor at the time, and my youngest daughter had offered to help me clean the cage, and I said, okay, that will probably be good for you. And I was actually in the cage, and you know how when someone's behind you, you don't necessarily have to look all the way and know that they're behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh my gosh, the dog just opened the door. Hang on just a minute, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Come on, guys.
Mickey's worried.
He comes in here and he is immediately looking at something that I can't see. All right, Mickey's the barometer.
He's
He is
staring at a wall or something?
he is staring at the closet in here, and he does this quite often.
Oh, the closet.
The closet, yes. And he, when the thing that happened a couple of months ago, that's what he was looking at, and he was growling. So I just knew that my daughter was behind me. I could kind of see out of my peripheral vision, but later on, she wasn't there. That evening, I was getting ready to go to the grocery store. And, at that time, I think my oldest daughter, she, I think, was around getting ready to go. It's been so long ago, I have a hard time keeping up with the ages and times, but she, being her age, did not want to go to the grocery store ever. So we were actually at the table eating, and I said, well, I need to go out to the grocery store. And she said, Mom, can I go with you? And I said, okay, you can go. And she said, if I tell you something, will you promise me you won't think that I'm nuts? And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, Mom, while you were cleaning the cage, there was a little girl behind you. And I said, are you sure it was Carrie? And she said, no. She said, this little girl had on a white gown, almost like your cliche old white lace type gown, long wavy hair. And she gave me a fairly decent description. And she said she turned around and she ran through the wall. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? It seemed to kind of come out in, little drips from her at the beginning. It was really strange because prior to this, I had an experience before she said anything. One night, my husband and I were in bed, and of course, like I said, I don't sleep very well, so I was kind of up watching, and I saw what I thought was one of my kids coming down the hallway. And at the time, they all had long, wavy hair. It was kind of dark. I just assumed that it was one of them. I was a little bit concerned that one of them was up sick. I mean, just a typical worrywart mother. I asked my husband, I said, do you mind getting up to see if one of them is sick? And he went to look, and they were all asleep. It was after that she told me I saw this little girl. Of course, even at that point, when my husband said they were all asleep, I'm still, they could have gotten up and went back and gotten in bed, before we realized it. But it's funny how you will rationalize, because I would have seen it, or them, or whoever, being awake and looking directly at the hallway. But that happened actually before she told me that, and I thought, okay, maybe you weren't imagining it. If she saw it, and my oldest daughter has always been kind of like the dog, the litmus test. And when they were younger, being a mother, she's always been kind of the way that she corroborates a lot, and we don't. Of course, when they were younger, I would have to be a nut as a mother to talk about this stuff in front of my children. So, when I would experience something, and when she would come to me and she's experienced the same thing, then I would really have to take a pause and think, okay, maybe you're really not crazy. But yeah, she didn't want to go. She told me why. She had a few more experiences with this, quote, little girl. After a while, we kind of suspected that this really wasn't a little girl by some of the behaviors. Whatever it was, would rake her fingernails down the hallway. She would drag at nighttime. She would stand at the threshold of my daughter's bedroom, wanted to play. She would become angry if Lauren would not get out of the bed or cover her head up or whatever. We've come to realize after all these years that some things just aren't what they're appearing to be. But that was the very first experience in that house where I thought, okay, apparently we did not leave this behind as much as we had hoped to. It kind of ramped up from there. We began to experience more scary things. It just rose to a different level of crazy, I guess you could say. Some of the things that we would see, shadow people. I had an experience in the house where I was so scared that I literally felt like I was going to lose my bladder, basically. Something that I saw. It's like I think I had told you that a lot of people want to see evidence, 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 and I do have some evidence. Of course, that can be purely subjective because I think sometimes no matter what you have, someone is going to find a reason why it's not evidence. So I do have some, but with a lot of the experiences that we have, and maybe other people can relate to this, a lot of times it's a gotcha moment. Because I can put a recorder or a camcorder. I've caught a couple of things. Sometimes you don't. A lot of the experiences that we've had, like I said, have been just gotcha. Okay, you're going about your business. You're not thinking about anything like that. And then all of a sudden, it's right in your face. So, we do have some, but, and Keith is privy to all of it. I just mailed him a jump drive with quite a bit of audio on it. But I have digressed. You'll have to guide me back because I don't know. I've gotten so far away, I can't remember where I was.
No, all of this is important information. Do you though even want to share what had you so scared? The thing that you were mentioning just a few minutes ago. Would you even want to describe what you saw?
Yes, I can do that. As I said, we had some really. It had evolved completely from what seemed to be a kind of a harmless ghost type thing to some very just really whacked out experiences. The shadow people were the kind of the next level in the experiences that we had. We began to see a lot of the shadow people. My husband at the time was kind of still skeptical. He's a minister, but at the same, and at this point, we're just like we can, and this is a whole other ball of wax, I guess you would say. But he was still a little bit, I mean, he's a wonderful person, but he's kind of like got that, okay, I'm in a house full of women. There are all these hormones. There's all this crazy imagination going on. He would humor us and listen, but I think that at that point, he just didn't really, he just didn't buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
But we did all start to have some really frightening experiences with shadow people, and I'm not really talking about the normal white bread, whatever you want to call it, garden variety shadow people. We saw some extremely large ones. I remember one night that I had woken up and turned over, and there was one in front of the window, the bedroom window, and had an absolutely humongous head. It scared me so bad that I did scream. very tall ones. The girls told me that there was an extremely tall one sometimes at nighttime that they would walk past the bedroom door if they were going to the bathroom. That was usually standing over me. On a couple of occasions, I would turn over in bed, and there were a couple of times when there was a smaller shadow person that would jump up from my husband's side of the bed, and I've never seen anything move so fast. It was out the door in like a blur. So, like I said, it's kind of these gotcha. Okay, I'm here. What are you going to do about it? You can't capture any evidence. I'm going to scare you. That's just it. But we had lots of experiences with shadow people. But the one thing, and my daughter had already been telling me, Mom, I'm seeing this particular thing, and you hate to say it, but you think, okay, she's a kid, she's exaggerating. That this is absolutely too wild. There's just no way. But I hated the attic. I hate attics. I hate basements. So, and I hate old houses now. I just, there's no way. But my husband wasn't home at the time. Usually I would ask him to go to the attic and get something down, but I really needed to get something down. And we had one of those, it's the ceiling, it's like a pull down ladder. So my middle daughter was standing there next to me. I pulled down the pull down ladder, and about the time that it came down, I heard this hissing, really loud. And it was almost like some sort of a chattering, but at about the same moment that I heard the hissing, I didn't get a really good look at it because, to be quite honest with you, I wasn't going to linger on it for very long. I can only describe it. It was almost like a cross between an insect and some sort of a humanoid thing. I've tried to draw pictures of it. I'm almost afraid to do that. But it had come to the edge of the attic, like at the very top, like you were going up the steps, there would be that ledge. And
Right.
of course, I didn't get up the ladder at all. I'm standing at the bottom looking at this thing, and I just let that ladder fly up and stood there and just cried hysterically. I was so scared. I don't know whether my daughter saw it or not, but you could see that I was really, really upset. I think that I saw this thing to the left, and she was standing far back to the left, not exactly at an angle that she probably could have seen it well. And she's always been a child that she kind of keeps things close. She doesn't really talk about these things a whole lot, but I do know she's had experiences. But there have been a couple of times in the 20 years where I have felt like I'm gonna lose my bladder. I'm so scared. I can't, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you've been so scared that it's just like you can't control your bodily functions, but that was one of the things. And prior to that, of course, my oldest daughter, as I said, had been telling me that she's seen something similar to that, almost like a spider-like thing. And I always got the feeling that whatever this was traveling from closet to closet. And I don't know why, other than, just that feeling. Didn't like closets either. But at that point, things had ramped up enough that I think when this happened, actually, this wasn't long before we left the house because it had gotten to that point. And she was actually a part of, I think she might have been in college because she's a librarian, and she had started to do research for another podcast. I don't know if I can mention that name or not.
Of course, yeah.
It's Astonishing Legends, with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess, and another. They're just great people.
They are.
I mean, they really, really are. And Scott and Forrest kind of got to know our situation through my daughter, and they started to become very concerned. So they had actually consulted, I think, a psychic medium at that point that they did. Actually got her to talk to my oldest daughter, and she really had some very interesting things to say. And, of course, everybody will say, well, you're Christians, why are you? And I just like to say at this point, we couldn't get any help from the church. And that continued. People can say what they want to say, but when you're in that type of a situation and you're desperate for help, you're desperate for help. And agree or not, we've actually had, more people outside of the church offer to help us than inside. With the exception of the Catholic Church, I will say that. But anyway, this particular psychic medium, she told my daughter, she said, you have something nesting in the attic. She said it's very ancient and it's very powerful. And when we left, we were getting ready to leave. She told her, she said, and it has a very long reach. And so I think it kind of corroborated what I felt because I just felt like that whatever this is, it is so evil, or so frightening, and so intense that it made perfect sense to me. And there's really, I don't think there was any way that she could have known that much about us. And then, later on, they actually asked, I think it was a psychic medium who would do remote viewing. And that's what she did at the second house. That's the second house. The first house, besides the apartment, we just, I think my oldest daughter had seen what she described as a humanoid figure. And she would just be completely beside herself. She said, Mom, I got up last night and I walked past the bathroom. She said, and this thing was squatted over the toilet. Just like, almost like when someone has to vomit. It was over the toilet. And I said, well, what did it look like? She's very, very pale skin, oddly enough, kind of reddish hair. And we are all redheaded, with the exception of her. I mean, we really look like, first of all, we're as small as hobbits. And, all of us have red hair. So it's, I don't know what kind of coincidence it was that whatever this was had red hair. But that's probably the most frightening thing that she dealt with was seeing that. I can't say that I ever saw it. The other situation that we had is, and I really never knew what to call this, really didn't know what it was, but I guess you would call it a doppelganger. Sometimes it was in voice, and sometimes it was in form. And the first experience that I had would be that my husband would be at church, basically. And most of the time he would enter from the downstairs laundry room door. And I was actually sitting on the couch one evening doing lesson plans. And I could hear him come through the door. And I could hear it, usually it's, hey, honey, I'm home. And I was convinced, that he was coming in, and there was no one there. With her experience, she had actually, of course, I think they were teenagers, or might have even been in college at the time. They had actually, I think my husband and I were sitting on the porch talking, and we may have even had company over, and it was a situation where she thought that she saw her little sister inside the house. But she came out on the porch, and her little sister was on the porch with us. And then she said, Mom, I got to thinking, and, there was something not right about that, because I think she said at the time that her little sister did not have bangs, but this thing did, like the fringe, the hair. And I may have it backwards, but basically she said there was something wrong with the hair. It was not the same. So we have had experiences with doppelgangers. It started in that house. I began to have night terrors, and I had never had night terrors. I think I sleep so lightly that I rarely ever dream. So that was extremely disturbing. My first night terror was a woman. She was at the foot of the bed, and just long, greasy, stringy hair, sunken in eyes, rotted teeth. She was laughing at me. And it wasn't an older woman. It was kind of like a middle-aged woman. And, I don't know if I was screaming. My husband woke up. The other night terror that I had, and I think I had one more, but I'm not even going to talk about that because it's just so horrible that I can't talk about it. I actually sat up in bed and was convinced that I had spiders all over me. They were in the bed, they were everywhere. My husband was doing the best that he could to, okay, wake up, wake up. There aren't spiders all over the place. They are not on you. I will just go on to say that the other one that I had involved snakes. So, I hadn't had any prior to that, and I don't think that I've had any. I don't recall any since then. But, at that point, we really wanted out. Kind of wanted to move to the country closer to the church. But, honestly, a lot of it was we really wanted out of that house. I know there are lots of experiences. I actually did keep a log for some time there, but it was extremely difficult to do because we had so much activity that I just got to the point where I couldn't keep up with it anymore. We did at one time capture a picture, and this was actually outside. We had some cats outside, and my youngest daughter loved cats. So she had taken some pictures of the cats, and one of the cats had actually, I don't know why she was sitting in my car. I don't know what the big deal was about that, but she had actually, one of our cats had gotten on the front windshield and was kind of propped up on the front windshield looking at her with its tongue hanging out. So she took a picture of it. It was a little while before she looked at it again, but she came in one morning and she said, "Mom, look at this." And so she pointed out to me, and we had a very, large outbuilding garage behind the house. And back on the rail fence, you could see a figure. And the lighting was just really strange. But we kind of looked at it. We could make out it looked almost like a Civil War uniform. And I would say Confederate. There was a rail fence, and that's where it was, and it looked almost like a dog was standing on the rail fence. But, I think that's one that we actually sent to Keith too. And I actually tried to recreate that and even take the timestamp off of the picture to make sure that this could not have been a human being standing back there. But I had my husband stand back there. I had one of the girl's friends stand back there. I took pictures from about the same distance, as I could discern. And it just was not the same. It was not the same. They were solid. This was not. So we had that experience. I've often wondered what was on that property. I mean, and we did live very close to what had been a plantation. Right directly across the road from us, there was a cemetery up on the hill where there were actually unmarked slave graves. So I do know there was a history there, But I also know that the body of water that we lived next to had also had some Native American artifacts. A mile or two up the river, I guess you would call it a river. It's almost like between a creek and a river, where they were getting ready to build a ham plant. When they started to excavate for that, they had actually dug up some Native American remains and artifacts, so they halted the construction of that.
Mm.
But I was teaching one day, and the people who owned the house before us actually sold the house, moved right across the road. And they were an older couple, they had grandchildren, and it just so happens that I had their granddaughter in class. And we were doing our Native American unit, so, they could bring things in if they had anything like that. And the little girl was in class one day, and I was up at front, and the thing that she wanted to show was a bag of arrowheads. And, if you've ever seen a gallon freezer bag, it was half full of arrowheads, just all different types. And I looked at her and I said, and she said her grandfather had dug them up. And I said, well, where did he dig those up at? And she said, your yard. And I'm just like, oh
Wow.
my gosh, does this have any, does this have anything to do with this? And my children, two of them had an experience when I was actually driving them in a car on the hill up around where the unmarked graves would be. They had seen something while we were driving, and I can remember it was like a really steep, windy hill, and we were coming around that, and it was actually, as cliche as this is, it was storming that night, and when I came, it was a very sharp curve, so you really couldn't see what was coming. I can remember my headlights. I remember seeing something in the headlights, but it wasn't, it was so fast that I couldn't see it. It basically, to me, it looked like Mr. Fog. And about that same time, the kids are like, oh my gosh, did you see that? And I, after everything that had happened to us, I just shut them down and I said, okay, don't say another word. Just wait till we get back to the house. So I stuck one in the back bedroom and I left one up front and I said, okay, what did you see? They corroborated each other. I mean, they couldn't repeat the story because they didn't tell it where the other one could hear it. But they described it as they said, an old-fashioned soldier. They were unsure of what, if it was Civil War or whatever. And a lady in a big hoop dress, and they said that there was a young man walking in front of them in tattered clothes. So, I'm beginning to wonder, well, if this is going on here, then what else is going on here? Why is this happening? Does this have something to do with that? And we kind of thought once again that when we moved to the second house, we're going to leave this behind because obviously this is environmental. We're just steeped in this area that seems to have a lot of history, and that's where this is coming from. Like I said, I have many, many, many more things that I could tell you, but it would just take forever, probably.
Shanna, do you mind if I take you back to the really scary sighting when you're trying to, you're beginning to pull down the stairs for the attic? You said it was insectoid, a little bit humanoid. Can you describe in as much detail as you can, if you're okay with it, what made it insect-like and what made it more humanoid-like?
Well, this is absolutely going to sound ridiculous, and I tried and tried to think of something that I could relate it to, and you're too young for this. I know you are, but in the 80s, I think it was, there was a show called Space Ghost, and there was like this insect. He was almost like a praying mantis. I think his name was Zorak, But I told my husband, I think, you almost have to laugh. Is that the best I can compare this to? Because it's unbelievable as it is. I mean, let alone to have to compare it to a cartoon character. But that is the face. It was almost between like that and a human. And it was somewhat similar to what my oldest daughter had described. And this will tie in later to the second house and the steps that we had to take to try to get some help there. But it does tie in later.
Yeah, I think I do remember
Yeah.
that actually. Didn't he have like it's almost like a praying mantis look,
Yes,
essentially his head, right? Yeah.
It had almost like a beak,
Mm-hmm.
and it had like the very high cheekbones, kind of almost. It was a beak, but I couldn't tell if it was a beak or a nose. That sounds kind of crazy, but that's the closest thing that I could come up with, like a cross between a human and an insect. And apparently, my oldest daughter had seen it before. And, she had described it, and she said it was very insect-like. She described it as almost spider-like, and I did. Oh gosh, I can't believe I'm saying this. I did see a second pair of what looked like arms, or when it had reached up to the edge of the attic, I could see at least two hands on each side. And I don't know, I did not get a good enough look to describe the hands. I don't know if they were hands, claws. I don't know what they were. I could just see the outline of something enough that I could tell that it was hands or whatever. I couldn't be more specific about that, but
No, I think you saw plenty, and I think that your reaction to that was exactly spot
exactly.
on.
Exactly. I mean, I just let that attic door just slam up, and it.
Bet you never went up there ever again.
No, never.
And you were already hesitant to go up there as it was. So you got so it was, and I can imagine this. I've never lived in a house that had an attic like that. We just don't have things like that in Las Vegas. But if you were up in an attic like that, it essentially is just a drop off. Like it's just a hole in the ceiling, right? And then there's the stairs if you are the one that is up in that space. So you got the impression that it was right there at the lip of this, and it was looking down at you?
Yes. Yeah. I could hear the hissing before I could see it. And our attic was such, I think, that we had, like I said, I didn't go up there. I don't think, maybe one time. I think we had maybe some plywood up there where we kept things stored, winter clothing or Christmas decorations. And, it did have a place where it could, peer over the edge there, the ledge. But
now,
yeah,
when Keith puts you guys in touch, especially with that one psychic that said what she said, when she said it is something ancient and powerful, and it has a very long reach, and it's in the attic, right? And it's tied to the attic and the closets, things like that, which ties into what you covered in the very, very beginning in relation to the dog, right? Did that blow you away when she said that? Because I'm assuming that to keep the information as pure as possible, Keith probably was not sharing information with her like that, right? Like when you heard that, I mean, how did that even make you feel? Because to me, if you knew that she didn't have any of this information and what you had seen, what your daughter had seen, that would absolutely terrify me to get information like that.
It did. And, let me just put it this way. I have very intense feelings of, I can sense when something's there, but I always kind of write it off because, people will say you can't rely on your feelings. You've got to have science-based evidence, or you've got to have the evidence. And, so for the longest time, I just kind of just wrote it off, but I always had the sense, that there was something that had situated itself back there. She described it as nesting. She used the word nesting. There's something nesting back there. And it, yes, I mean, it very much matched up with the way that I felt. And, you know, like I said, according to her, it was traveling from closet to closet. And that's where we had felt like it was traveling, where a lot of the feelings, the activity was coming from, you know, knocks and raps on the closet. We had gotten to the point where I had actually gone to a craft store and bought up like 8 iron crosses, and the looks that I got, you know, this lady, what in the world is she doing? But we had placed crosses on the outside of the doors, and I think we had an incident there. I swear, when I start talking about it, it's just like going down the rabbit hole. But we had an incident where my oldest daughter's bedroom, and this is, I think, another situation where my husband really started to lose his skepticism. That, and he had 2 incidences at church that just left him. He came in one night and he was as pale as a ghost. But I kept telling him that, okay, I went in her room, I shut the door. When I turned my back, something just pounded that door. And I'm not talking about rapping, I'm talking about pound the door. Enough to make me jump. Then the kids started to have that experience. And one evening he went in there for some reason and came back out, and it happened to him. I might have even been standing there. So he was just like, well, he just stood there with his jaw hanging open, I think. Because at that point he realized, well, maybe they aren't hormonal at all. This is really happening. But I'll go a little further into the rabbit hole, and this is where he, I think, really started to think, you know, this is really happening. He came home one night from church, and he came in and he sat down on the edge of the couch, and he just looked like the blood had been drained from his face. And I could tell something was wrong, and you know, what's going on? What happened? And he said, well, he was very hesitant to tell me. He said, I have something really disturbing happened at church. He said, when I was up there and I started to lead the invitation, I had my eyes closed, he said, and you know how when someone walks very close by you, even with your eyes closed, you can feel almost that brush, and instinctively you step back a little. And I said, yeah, I know, you know what you're talking about. He said, that happened. He said, and I opened my eyes and there was nothing there, basically. And then the second time anything ever happened to him, it was while he was in front of the church. And he had his eyes wide open during this event. He looked, and as I can't remember exactly what part of the service it was, but he could see a black shadow just cross right over the congregation and pretty much just blocked them out. So at that point, you know, I think he really started, and we had another incident with the girls, and I were dealing with this almost on an everyday basis. The shadow people, the noises, the growling, it sounds sometimes like we had mice or rats in the wall that would scratch. And, you know, maybe we did, but it just didn't happen all the time. He actually got, I think at this point, he was getting angry because we were always so scared, so apprehensive. And something had happened with a shadow that night, and I had gotten up to use the restroom. It just got to the point where I wouldn't even go to the restroom at night by myself. I would wake him up and have him take me. But this time I'd actually gotten up and went. And while he was in there by himself, he kind of challenged it and said, why don't you leave my wife and kids alone? And he said at that point, something got in his face and growled so viciously that it absolutely terrified him. And I came back and kind of scolded him. I said, well, now you know that you just don't address these things. And we never did. We never addressed them directly. I think at that point I was very hesitant to even try to get any evidence of it because I was afraid of drawing it in even more. So at those points and at that house is when I think that he really started to think, that there really is something going on here. And if he was like me, probably he may have had some experiences and he just blown them off, rationalized. But yeah, I mean, at that point, I think he realized that it wasn't just all hormones and imagination. So
It'd be a
I
whole
think
lot
I've
better if it
totally gone
was,
off.
because then
Yeah, yeah,
once supposedly the hormones stop raging, then all of this should go away. But that was not the case, and that was a question because it's a common question that will get asked in occurrences like this: is, well, did you ever confront it out loud? Whether it's in a really challenging way or just to politely say, hey, why are you here? What do you want? What do you need from us? And he did that and something growled in his face. So I'm sure, yeah, at that
yes,
point he's going, okay, so you're powerful enough
yeah,
to follow us home to home, follows him to essentially his work, right? His passion. He's at church, he's doing his thing. And to see a shadow large enough to block out the entire congregation, I mean, holy cow.
yeah. Well, I don't know if it's was so much at one time, but as it moved across, it
Mm-hmm.
blocked out
As
what
it
it
was
was
moving,
moving
right.
past. Yeah, but it was that was a very frightening experience for him. Before we left that house, I think it was before we left that house. I had actually went in for a psychological screening because I thought, well, maybe you're schizophrenic or maybe this is some type of psychosis that you don't realize that you have. So I did go have screened, and I'm pretty sure my oldest daughter did. At some point, I'm pretty sure that my husband did. We wouldn't have anything that caused those sorts of hallucinations, be it visual or auditory. And sometimes it was smells. One of the things that I started to notice in the oddest way was that before anything would happen, or it was almost like a signal, I would smell cigarette smoke. And we didn't smoke. And it was so strong. And I thought, this is all in your head. This is all in your head. At some point, one of the girls had one of the friends, and I don't know that I don't think that we talked anything about that because at that point I'd just written it off as you're imagining things because maybe my dad smoked like 5 packs a day and it was a very unpleasant experience because he would roll the car windows up. So I really wasn't crazy about cigarette smoke. So, but I came in from the grocery store and this guy was sitting at the couch, usually where I sit, and he looked up at me and he said, I smell cigarettes. And I thought, okay, maybe you're really not insane. Although you question yourself 50 times a day as to whether you really are or aren't. But he had that experience there. And some of the friends that they would bring home would have their experiences. Now, I don't know at that age whether they're so influential or whatever that, simply because maybe they've heard it, they're going to imagine it. I can't say 100%. It could be just that kind of thing. But we did have kids that would come in that would experience some things. I don't I think at one point, my best friend, a very skeptical person, like I said, I think she might have had one incidence there, but I can't remember exactly what it was. But yeah, it at that point, it had really ramped up considerably.
Was it an experience enough to where it diminished her skepticism of your experiences and, I mean, your entire family going through this all this time?
You know, I don't know. I think myself, as much as we've been through and as long as we've been through it, like I said, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't doubt my own sanity. And probably, she's just very, I guess you would say, a straight arrow. She's a no BS type of person. I love her dearly. It's just not anything I think that she would completely entertain. But that, I think that kind of shook her up just a little bit. And she did in the third house that we lived in. No, let's see, second house that we lived in. This is our third. She had an experience there. But when I move on to the second house, we can talk a little bit about that. I don't know whether that it could possibly be that she may believe a little bit now, but for my sake, she may not want to play it up too much just to keep from making it worse for me. I guess that would be what I would think, because, she's very aware of the turmoil and things like that. So I guess maybe she didn't feel like that she should put fuel on the fire, so to speak.
Right. Now, Shanna, did this psychic essentially, did she have any explanations? Did she say that she felt like this was one thing that could manifest as many different things, or she felt like there was many different things going on, plus this ancient, powerful nesting being, which is such a gross word to put with it, nesting, when you think about what you saw in the attic, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember. I think that was enough. That, I really don't remember. I think
No, that's okay.
That was just, that in and itself was hard to take.
Yeah. Yeah, because she was so spot on. I mean, at that point, you're going, how in the world do you even know where exactly it is? And you're having problems with the attic and the closets, and yeah.
And if I recall anything later on, I will tell you, but I don't recall anything specific. But
no,
like I said,
okay.
this is just such a running record of.
Well, yeah, go right ahead. Wherever you were going to go next. Sorry for interrupting there.
Oh gosh, I don't even, as it pertains to that house, the first house, my daughter, interestingly enough, my youngest daughter sent me a picture the other day where there was a older man who lived right next to us, and she asked me, she said, did he die? Did such and such die? And I said, yeah, he died. I can't remember when it was, a couple of years ago or whatever. She said, well, there's this picture on Facebook that this realtor took, and it kind of captured our old house porch. She said, but Mom, look on it. I mean, look at the porch. There's something on there that looks weird. So I looked at it and I blew it up, and even zoomed out, it looked like a woman sitting on the porch, but she had a gray dress on. She had long black hair. It was almost like she was sitting with her legs draped over the edge of the porch, and she was holding something that to me looked like maybe a baby wrapped in a black blanket. And I thought, well, maybe you're, what do you call it, visually matrixing or something like that. Pareidolia, is that something like that?
Yeah.
And, maybe you're just imagining this stuff. And so I sent it to my older daughter, and she looked at it, and, she said, well, it does kind of look like that. Yeah. But I had actually taken it and turned it black and white and kind of contrasted it. And yeah, it's definitely strange. Whether that is what it is or not, I don't know. Could it have been something else in the background? Possibly. But that's, it was unsettling to me. And, like I said, this has just been recently in the last month or so. When we sold the house, I think it was 6 months later, the people who bought it moved out. They had actually, I had actually, I can't remember if I had left teaching by that point. I'm pretty fairly sure that I did, because one of the teachers that I was friends with, she had actually messaged me and she said, is your address such and such? Was that your address? And I said, yeah, why? And she said, well, one of the students just came up to me and for whatever reason had to give his address, and gave her our old address. And she said, what? She didn't think that he lived there or that they had bought the house. And sure enough, they were renting it from these people. I guess they could have gotten another job and moved away though. But another teacher had told me that she thought that it was vacant for a while. And she was one of these people that she was very, I guess you would be in tune with things like that. She'd had her own experiences. And she would tell me every time I drive past that house, I just have this horrible feeling. And when you guys lived there, I had that horrible feeling. You know, So, we have had instances where people would say that, and, some people might say she's flaky or whatever, but that's another reason why that we have kept to ourselves, is because we never really wanted to draw attention to the people who now own the property where we previously lived. We didn't want to do that. And, besides the fact that, a lot of people think that you're nuts, so definitely didn't want to get them involved in it.
All right.
And in some instances, people are not going to tell you the truth anyway, even if it is happening. So
yeah, it's still a very taboo subject for many folks, and
exactly.
They're instantly going to judge you. So how long have they been in the house now?
Okay, I think they sold it. They vacated it after 6 months. I think they rented it. They sold it, or the people that rented it moved out, and I think it has a new owner now. My best friend, she's actually still a teacher, is friends with the other lady who used to say that, the other teacher who used to say that she would drive past there and get this horrible feeling. She had contacted me, it's been within the last year, and she said that someone had started like a little, I guess you would say, subdivision over there where we used to live, new housing. And a lady, I didn't really understand what she was saying, but I think she had said that the lady owned and lived in a condominium, but she was in the process of she bought this house. She had not sold the condominium yet. She moved over there to the house, and she was kind of a skeptic. But she had told someone that she began to hear footsteps and things like that in the house. And I guess after a while, she left the new house and went back to the condominium. She told someone that she wasn't going to live there. And it was in pretty close proximity to where we lived. So I don't know whether that was just a really sketchy area, or things were drawn to that area. For all I know, everyone around us probably might be having the same experiences, but it's just
Right.
like I said, not everybody's going to talk about it. So rarely do they ever talk about it.
Yeah, and you wonder then with that area, you have Native American burial grounds and artifacts and ghosts of soldiers. If things are as much as they maybe can be, if power, and energy has something to do with it, which I believe we all think that it does, if it is tailor-made to the person seeing it, right? Like, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. And now that you guys have left that house, it would be incredible to hear if the new folks living there have anything going on.
Oh, yes. Now, the people who sold it to us, the guys, they're really, really good people, but they are definitely extremely no nonsense. And it's quite possible that they had experiences, but I would never dream of going up to their front door and saying, hey, and it's not that I didn't think of it, but I can't imagine going to the door and saying, did you have anything weird happening in the house? They just aren't the people that you would pose that question to. So, yeah, I've often wondered, what's going on around us. If this is happening to us, what's happening to everybody else? But, in most cases, you're never going to know. And I'm not going to ask.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I wouldn't either. I would not either. And besides that, it's like poking bears or ancient bears, as it were in this case, right? And you're like, I don't need to talk about it any more than I already have.
Oh, yeah. And we were at the point there where we just didn't. We just didn't. Like I said, we were professional people, and he was a minister, and, we just really didn't want that stigma and its scrutiny. I would like to say that for anyone else who has had this experience, or these experiences, and I understand questioning and wanting proof and things like that, but, you have to really consider the people that are enduring this, because, as I said, it's insult to injury. When you're wrapped up in this, I just can't help but feel like that a lot of people, you're just trying to get through it. You're not really interested in proving it unless you've got a lot of people, on your back all the time. Well, you better. And like I said, we didn't talk about it a whole lot, but I've always said, I can't prove it to myself. How in the world am I going to prove it to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
I can take a picture, I can take a recording. Someone might hear it, someone may not. Somebody most usually will come up with some explanation. My daughter actually was on Astonishing Legends podcast because she was on the research committee, and they had an episode. They had 2 episodes called Archipalooza, and that's basically where the people that research them come on and tell their personal experiences. And I've actually had a woman on Twitter, and I can't remember whether I was in the Astonishing Legends. It might have been the Facebook group, but she figured out that I was the mother. So this woman approached me on direct message and Twitter and began to basically just scrutinize everything I said. Well, to kind of tore it apart. And I'm like, you know what? I can't prove it to you. I can't prove it to myself. Yes, it's possible that everything you're saying is true. That's the explanation for it. But to be quite honest with you, I don't have the energy for that. I don't sleep. And sometimes I think people don't realize, regardless of whether they think it's a real experience or not, obviously people believe that they're experiencing this, and the effect is still the same. You're tired. It's a fatigue I can't describe. Sometimes you're on edge. As I said, for the longest time, I would not go into the bathroom by myself. My husband would have to take me to the bathroom. So the last thing that anyone needs that experiences things like we've experienced is to have someone on their back scrutinizing everything. Well,
Right.
prove this, prove that. No, I can't prove it. Can't even prove it to myself. I don't have the energy. So, and it's the same thing with evidence. It's just like I said, most of the time it's a gotcha. It's a gotcha. Just, walk into the garage. It's a gotcha. So I'm sorry I got off on my tangent. I just
No, don't apologize for those tangents. They can be very, very useful. Now, Shanna, what about in the email you mentioned that people and pets both had gotten very sick at some points, right? You had some sicknesses going around. Can you describe some of that?
yes. In 2000, let's see. I guess it was around 2003. I began to, oh, how old was I? I couldn't have been, let's see. I was 29 when we got there, and that was about 6 years later, so I guess about 35. I began to get to the point where my joints hurt so bad, my elbows and things, that I literally could not pick up a can of soda. And muscle aches just hurt all over, just all of a sudden. And in that building, I didn't mention that the people that I worked with, I was at the time on the housekeeping staff, because when you're in college, you're usually very poor. We had the 3 kids and they had to eat. But I began to have these physical symptoms. And the ladies that I worked with had told me, well, we've heard footsteps coming up the stairwell. They had experiences where they would go into a dorm room, they would walk in, and the light would come on by itself. They would walk out, it would go off. They'd walk back in, it would come back on. And even at that point, I'm just like, But I started to experience these, it was almost debilitating. And like I said, I was about 35 at the time. So after that, I found out that I had lupus, right? Systemic lupus. I've had that. I have had hospitalization for things like obstruction. I was hospitalized once for what they thought was brain inflammation, which would have been related to the lupus, I'm sure. But 2015, I was diagnosed with melanoma. 2019, my husband collapsed on me in cardiac arrest while I was cutting his hair. That same month, in 2019, I was diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis type 2, which basically that same month I was, and thank God it turned out to be a misdiagnosis. They basically told me that usually that type 2 does not respond to the treatment, and most likely you're going to have a liver transplant.
Mm.
I, at that point, decided to go to Cleveland Clinic and get that straightened out. As it turns out, as a result of the cardiac arrest that my husband went into, he had to have heart surgery in Cleveland. Right after I had the cancer excision surgery, this was on a Thursday, I went in on Monday to have another routine surgery, and I wound up in the hospital for 2 weeks after that happened with an internal abscess. My children have been sick. Pets have gotten sick. As I said, we had rescued pets. We had, and people think of guinea pigs basically most of the time as disposable, but in actuality, when you take care of them, they will live fairly long life, as long as a large dog. At one point, within the period of just a few months, we had 5 that died, and we're very big on taking our animals to the vet. I mean, they take them into the vet, but in just a very short period of time, we had several that died. And I remember things breaking, appliances, cars, just constantly, just bad luck, financial problems, just all sorts of things. And I can remember our principal, he looked at my husband and he said, "You people are the most unlucky people I have ever seen in my life."
Mm.
And, you know, you're afraid to say what next, because, you know, and we're pretty much in that situation right now. We have been since then. But, you know, you just take it one day at a time and try not to think negative thoughts, and for the fear that it's going to draw that much more, and, you know, pray a lot and just survive it and try to laugh. I'm you have to, in order to get through it. But
What about the extreme personality changes that you mentioned?
that, when we moved to the second house was in a extremely rural area. I laugh sometimes and say that we were 14 miles in every direction from a roll of toilet paper. And that, while that seems idyllic to some people, oh, we're going to move out into the country, they romanticize it, probably wasn't the best move in the world as far as feeling isolated or alienated. At that point, we had moved out way into the country, closer to the church. We had to commute pretty far to teach, and we were still teaching at the time, but moved closer to the church. And I can remember before we made that move, it's like something had said, this is either going to make you or break you. I can remember that, but I never really said anything to my husband. And it was an extremely beautiful piece of property. It was 16 acres, basically a little mini farm. You know, we had donkeys and just a gorgeous place. Anybody that would come in, the way that we situated the house was just like basically overlooking like a beautiful valley. I guess we had been there, it was about 3 years at that point. And when we first moved in, I didn't feel a thing. You know, I had even said a few times, this is peaceful. I don't feel this heaviness here. It's just, there's just a palpable difference. I thought, you know, I kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Let's see, we moved in, I think, in July of 2017. It was pretty good for a couple of months. And then things started to happen just a little bit, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, this is your imagination because you've had these experiences. You're just imagining that, you know, that they're happening again. Just settle down. But Thanksgiving, my middle daughter, the one who, she's very level-headed. Not that my other kids are not, because they are, but she plays it close to her chest. She was spending her night Thanksgiving. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, she comes into our bedroom and she says, "Mom, can I sleep on the couch?" At that time, she had been sleeping back in one of the guest bedrooms. And I said, "Well, yeah, you can, but why do you want to? Well, I mean, you've got a bed." She never would say anything. She wouldn't, but she got on the couch. Well, at Christmas time, you know, my oldest daughter was there, the youngest daughter was there, and my oldest daughter, I think it was my oldest daughter, was going to sleep in the bedroom that my middle daughter was going to sleep in. Well, she pulled her two sisters back there in the back where I couldn't hear, and she said, "Don't sleep in that room. Just don't." So they wound up sleeping together in that room. But finally, I don't know if I had mentioned about something happening, but eventually they told me, "Mom, there's something wrong with that room." Things started to happen at that point again. most notably in the room that they were talking about. And we had always had issues with lights flickering or flashing. In this house, they don't flicker, they strobe. They had started strobing in that room when we lived there, the second house. And of course, I had my husband up on the stepladder, check that light, check the ballast, check, change out the light bulbs, blah, blah, blah. And then I start going into, oh my gosh, we've got an electrical problem. The house is going to burn down. And, the house itself at that time was only 3 years old. So when you get through all that, what do you have left? But, when you have a family, even though my kids were grown, you still think, oh my gosh, it's a house fire, or, you think the absolute worst. So we go through all this routine of, trying to find out a rational explanation. But there was a point in time when I could go in there, and I'll never forget, my oldest daughter's boyfriend had pulled up into the driveway. The light was strobing in there, and he said, "You're kidding." He came in the house, and we were in there. It was, I half expected the Bee Gees to show up. It was just crazy. So he said while he was in the driveway that he thought that the TV was playing in that room. Just like you go past the window, you can tell that a TV's on. It started off like that. Probably the most frightening thing that happened to me in there was that I was in there working on a shelf or something, and I can remember I'd kind of squatted down in the floor, and I kind of sensed that somebody was behind me, but I thought it was my oldest daughter. She had actually moved back in at that time. I actually, called her by her name. No answer. Wasn't answering. But whatever was standing behind me sounded like a little girl did. Can't remember exactly what was said, but at that point, I jumped up and ran out screaming. She was at the time taking a nap, so it was most definitely not her. We had, of course, shadows. I actually have video of the dog. I was there in the evening with just the dog. My husband was working, and we heard like a big crash in the back of the house. So I get up, the dog walks with me. I open up one door, and it's not that door, but I open up one bedroom door. She goes in, she noses around. I go back, I open that door, and she will not cross the threshold. She looks in, looks back up at me, she comes back out, and then she walks a few steps, and she sits and she looks at me and she whines. I do have some video of her actually where we're there by ourselves, and she's with me on the couch. There is no one there, and she is watching something that I cannot see, and she's growling. And when they do that, that freaks me out. And it's not like she's looking out the window, she's looking in the house, she's growling. I think I have a couple of videos like that. These were just, shadow people back in there again. And at that point, I guess my oldest daughter had actually been talking to Scott and Forrest about it again. And they were beginning to be concerned again. And so they attempted to contact the one psychic medium that they had talked to before. But I think that maybe they could not make that connection. So they actually got in touch with another one. And she was a remote viewer and had a partner who is actually a Christian. And I know once again people are going to say you shouldn't be messing with it. I know how the church goes, so you shouldn't be messing with that kind of stuff. You're just going to make it worse. That's heresy, whatever. So they asked if that would be okay, and I said, it's fine with me, because if anybody can give us answers at that point, that's fine. So she did do a remote viewing. She came back. She didn't know anything about the situation. And she said, I saw at least 2 shadow people. I did not talk to them. She said, but I got the impression, or one of them was giving her the impression, that they were overseeing our spiritual. Well, with my experience with shadow people, and personally, I mean, people might disagree with me, I just don't feel anything good from a shadow person. I don't. I never have. And to me, it was not overseeing, it was meddling, is the way that I felt. She said that she had seen 2 shadow people. Basically, they hung around in the bedroom where my husband and I were. And coincidentally, that's one of the places where the dog did not like to go either. And she also said there were some other type of entities in there, but she said there were too many for her to count. So she made the observation, and I think this is one of the lessons that can be learned from this, and hopefully it will help someone. She said that it's been let go too long. It's just gone on way too long. It's out of control without any intervention. And that's true. And I don't think my husband would mind to tell you that, it's just that the way that the church thinks, I think, prevented him from actually doing what needed to be done, because he was afraid it would get out and he would be stigmatized, and, yada, yada, yada. That would happen. So it went on for so long and she explained it as basically like attracts like. Once you've got things in there like that, it's just like they keep coming. So, we had, of course, we just, like I said, we usually had so much going on that I didn't even try to document it or write it down. I don't even know if I did a recording there. But it wasn't long after my husband had his heart attack that we began to experience personality changes. And like I said, he and we've been married for, oh my goodness, now I'm really going to show how ADD I am. Let's see, 33 years. And we're best friends. We've just always been best friends. The kids would tell you up until that point, they might have heard us argue maybe a total of 5 times. So he's extremely easygoing, very patient. And I think I have very long suffering patience. And, I'm a true redhead. I can only take so much and then I explode. But I have very long suffering patience. But we got along really well. Didn't fight in front of the kids. Didn't argue. But it absolutely just started doing things totally out of character. And it wasn't just like a gradual thing. It was just like boom. And to the point where we would just look at each other and say, I don't even know who you are. Fighting, arguing, screaming, yelling. It got so bad that my oldest daughter moved out. She left the house. It was downright scary. I really can't get into the specifics of it, but it just happened so quickly, and it was so intense and so extreme that I cannot help but wonder, did this have something to do with it? And just as quickly as it happened, it absolved. So I had actually called the psychic medium who had done the remote viewing, and I was talking to her one day, and I explained to her in detail, this is going on, and I don't even know who this person is. He doesn't know who I am anymore. And she could very much relate to what I was saying because she and her husband had been through it. So, I would call Keith, and, I don't hold anything back with Keith. He knows the whole story. But he was very, very concerned. And he encouraged me to at least try to find someone around there, as we hadn't had any luck so far. So, I thought, I'm going to call a Catholic church. I'm going to research and see if there's anyone out there who would be willing to come and talk to us. So I did find a priest in northern Kentucky. He was actually trained by Father Vince Lampert. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he was trained at the Vatican, I think, for a while. He talked to me, gosh, I think it was only like a day or two he was there. I think it was on a Wednesday. He was back there on a Monday with 2 assistants. And I'm sure probably that one of them, I'm to understand that sometimes in these situations they will bring a psychologist just to make sure that you're not, that you don't have a mental illness of some sort. But anyway, he began to bless the house. Now, when he was there the first time, that particular room, he did cleanse it. He put holy water on the door. The light stopped. It stopped. When he came back with his assistant, he went through the house again. This time, he had brought a girl with him. She was actually a former practicing witch, and you know what? I'm not the type of person that is going to hammer on the Wiccans. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not, because to be perfectly honest with you, in certain circumstances, as I said, some of the people outside of the church have been more willing to listen than the ones in there. And my husband has often made the statement regarding the church, they don't even believe what they believe. So, regarding ghosts and things like that, because they are mentioned in the Bible. So she was a former practicing witch, and, she came in, and now you have to take into consideration that they knew nothing about the remote viewer who had been there. And she had already told me basically some of these little entities were a little, I think she even described them, some of them as elementals. They were smaller, like scouts. Keith would call them scouts because I'd asked them previously because I'd seen them in the first house we lived in. So they didn't know anything about it. And my oldest daughter had cats. She had 2 cats, and I noticed that the cats would be sitting specific places, and they would stare at one place for a really long time. One of them was at the laundry room at kind of like the vent on the bottom of the door. They would sit and look through the vent. And sometimes they would talk to things that you couldn't see, if you've ever heard a cat kind of carry on a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But in particular places, in the master bathroom, they would do that. At the laundry room. Well, as he was going through and cleansing the different rooms, he went into that one particular bedroom again. When he came out, he went out on the deck with my husband, he and his other assistant. She was in there with us, and, she was talking. I walked into, by now we called it the creepy room because we couldn't figure out what else to call it. So I had walked back into the creepy room. And when I went, it smelled like sewer had busted in there. It smelled like we had a busted sewer. So I came back out and I said, I don't know if I'm imagining this or not, or maybe the sewer pipes had broken, but it smells like sewer in here. So she went in there, she smelled it. She ran back out and grabbed the priest. He came back in, he went in and cleansed it again. The meantime, my husband had been out there on the deck with him, so he had no idea that I had gone into that room and smelled that. No idea, because the priest hadn't gone back out. So he comes in, he goes into our master bathroom, he comes out and says, it smells like sewage in there. He goes back in there, cleanses that, comes back out. He goes into the laundry room where the cats would sit and talk through the grill, the vent. And while he's in there, the girl who was with them while he was cleansing that laundry room came out. She said, "Did you see that?" She was talking to the priest. She said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "No, what?" She said, "Something come running out of there." She showed about how tall it was. I would say about 3 feet. And it really kind of gave me the chills because they had no idea what the remote viewer had seen it. So, we did have the priest came in. He was actually, I really, really liked him because he was definitely not what I had envisioned a Catholic priest to be. He comes in and he looks like this big burly mountain man, just really jolly and everything, and just funny. And some of the things that he would say were just funny. But he had told my husband out on the deck, he said, "You have got to take charge." He said, "You've got to take authority." He said, "These things are always going to be here. They are not going to leave. They are going to be around." He said, "And they are going to look for any crack that they can possibly slip into." And we found that is the absolute 100% truth. And he left us with holy water. He left us with salt. He actually left us with some emblems. We do use those. But we actually did at that point get help from the Catholic Church. We haven't heard from him again, but I think they really wanted us to come and attend the Catholic Church, which unfortunately for his diocese, he was like about 2 hours away. So that was really kind of hard to do. But, and it's not that he has learned to cleanse the house, but you have to be extremely diligent. And the father told him while he was there, he said, I'm pretty sure he told him, for right now, this house needs to be cleansed every single day. He said, then you can let up for a little while, maybe every week. But if he lets up, you can definitely feel it building. Just last night, I got him up and I said, you've got to cleanse. And then last week he had to. I said, you have to. This is just getting out of hand again. But I'm very thankful to the Catholic Church that they did reach out and help us at that point in time.
The remote viewer. You mentioned that she's talking about shadow people and all these things that are going on, right? And that things have been allowed to go on far too long. Do you remember, or did she tell you when you mentioned these other entities that she said she saw? Did she describe these other entities or what she believed they were?
Not really. And she had said she really didn't know what they were, which I thought was, kind of strange. Not that she's strange. I just felt like it was really strange because I think at this, basically, we think we've got them pretty much pegged. But she said that she really didn't know what they were. She described them as possibly elementals. Keith would always say scouts, which is what I thought. And, I would ask him, well, what's a scout? He said, basically, they're sent in, just like a scout. They watch everything you do. They're kind of on a lower hierarchy. They go report back. They've learned all this information about you, and then the big bads come in. So, and this is one situation when things got really, really bad there. I did see what I would call a big bad. And I say big bad because whatever this was, if it was a shadow person, it was extremely small. I mean, blacker than black. I was actually coming out of the bathroom one night, I guess when I got my nerve up by myself, and I turned to my left, and there it was. And I just took a flying leap into the bed at that point. Horrible feeling. But I feel like at that point, there were the two, and then there was the big bad. And that's what I told my husband. These two are bad enough, but this one's worse. So when things were really, really, really bad, as far as personality, this thing was there. And I feel like I kind of hung around at that point, because then we began to see in a different, I feel like a different form. Before we left, it's almost like that it had gotten more bold. It had actually, we were commuting at that time about an hour and a half to work one way, and we had left very early in the morning. Well, when we would leave the living room blind up, to let the light in. And we were pulling out of the driveway. I look over at the window through the living room, and I see what looks to be something crouched down, and it is extremely black. It reminds me of like a piece of obsidian, like the glossy, really glossy rock. I mean, like a rubber suit of some sort. So I can see that through the window. Can't see it very clearly, but I can see it enough to make that much out. And I look at my husband and I said, I just saw this thing crouched down by the couch watching us as we pull out of the driveway. And he kind of hesitated, and he said, when we were pulling out the other morning, he said, I saw it too, except it was standing in the bedroom doorway. And he had seen a shadow person previously. I was actually lying on his lap in the living room. I told him, I said, it feels like something just touched my back. Something touched me in the back. And this is a common occurrence for me. Something's always touching my back, my hair. I've had scratches. At that particular house, I started to have bruising and could not explain it. Of course, my first explanation is it's lupus, and it could have been. It's some sort of vitamin deficiency, but a lot of bruises started to show up at the same time. And usually I would wake up with them. So, I'm sorry.
No, you're
I'm
okay.
lost again.
That's okay.
It's just like there's so much that is trying to come out that I can't keep up with it, I guess you would say. It's just been held in so long. But I'm actually on the couch, something touches me. And I told him, I said, something just touched me on the back. Well, he didn't say anything, but later on he said, when you said that, he said there was something standing in the bedroom doorway, a very, very, very tall shadow that was watching. And I had never heard him say anything like this before as far as a feeling or an insight. And he said, I just got the feeling it was jealous. And then he began to express that he felt like that it was very possessive of me. With the degree of activity directed at me, sometimes I have to wonder. I have talked to Keith about it. But, we did have those incidences like that. It's like I told you before we talked, I said, this is going to be a long one. And I feel like I haven't told you, a lot of what I could, but I'm just trying to remember. And going back to the priest that came in and the tie-in with what happened at the first house, with what I saw in the attic. Apparently, my daughter had been seeing that in this house, and she hadn't said a whole lot about it. But she was trying to describe to the priest's assistant what she had seen. And he immediately got his phone out and flipped it open And he said, "Is this what you saw?" And it was. She was completely freaked out because he could pull it out that fast, and that's exactly what she had saw. But it was a particular demon. And I can't remember exactly which one, and to be perfectly honest with you, I would be afraid to mention it by name, but
Yeah.
he he basically took her out there and doused her in holy. So, and just as a funny aside, with our personality changes, the priest looked at my daughter and said, "Do I need to douse your mother and father with holy water?"
Mm-mm.
And she said, "Yes, you do."
Oh.
Um,
Oh.
yeah, I mean,
Funny, but
and
not
that
funny, right?
place,
But you guys try to definitely keep upbeat about this. But like
oh,
you said, what else are you supposed to
absolutely.
do? It's
You get
nonstop.
it's nonstop, and unfortunately, on that piece of property was just straight up weird. I could get into other things that happened there, and I'm just like, what in the world is going on? Because this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's still weird. So, we wound up selling that and moving to the house that we're in now, presently. And it's just the same thing over again. I come in first month or so. I wish I could describe it because you walk in and it's just like a lightness. It's like a peace. You can breathe a sigh of relief and think, I don't feel anything here. I can go to the bathroom by myself. But after living in three houses, as flaky as it seems, I have become, I guess, cognizant of like the calling cards of when the activity is going to start. I've finally come to accept that there are some hallmarks of when things begin to start. And usually it is with talking. And it's almost like a convention of voices. And once again, yeah, maybe I need to go have myself screened again. That's possible, and I'm willing to do that. But it starts up that way, knocking. We have a lot of that in here. We had a lot of that at the second house we lived in and the first. In the second house, we had a whole lot of what sounded like scratching in the walls. In the first house, we did. As of yet, we don't have this here. But let's see, we've been here since last November. But the intensity here, the way that things have just gotten so much more intense here and so quickly, I'm just kind of, it's a beautiful house. It's a small house, but it's a beautiful house, and it's only 5 years old. And like I said, I really try to avoid anything that has an attic, a basement, or it's an older house because I just feel like I can feel when I walk in this stuff. But we had the strobing of lights in the second house. We have it here even worse. And I'm just really nervous about electrical issues. And it actually started in the garage this time. I could go in there and the lights would just start to strobe. I actually have a video of it and check the lights, see what's going on. Well, I just kind of blew this off and thought, yeah, just probably the light bulbs, and we'll get along. We'll change them. But it began to go to other rooms. When I would go to we have like a little laundry nook in the kitchen. That started in there. I kind of blew that off too. Just recently, here in the last couple of weeks, I go in the bathroom and it's not just flickering, it's strobing now.
Now, is it only doing that when
Yesterday,
you walk into the room, or you notice it when you're outside of either the bathroom or this little laundry area, and that's what turns your gaze to that room, because then it begins and then you go in?
most of the time, the majority of the time when I go in there, it starts.
Mm.
This weekend, I was actually on the phone with my sister, and I get pretty upset when I talk about my father for very good reason, but the bedroom light started to do the same thing. And I'm just like, my art desk in my art room, brand new lamp that I use to paint, starts to flicker. And I told my husband, I said, as soon as we get the money, we have got to call an electrician in here, because if there's something wrong with the electricity, we need to be getting on this. And he'll say, no, this is a new house. We live in the suburbs where all the houses are new like this. And if there was some sort of an electrical issue, there would be a lot of them having electrical issues. They're a pretty reputable construction company. So, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It could be the light bulbs, it could be whatever, but it's just, we actually did an experiment one day, and this was in the garage. I said, you walk in there and see if it starts to, and I call it strobing because that's exactly what it looks like. You see if it does it for you. And he walked in, didn't do it. He came back, I walked in, it started to do it again. I walked out, he walked back in, didn't do it. We did this several times. So I really don't know what's going on with that. I really don't. But things in this house have turned particularly intense, and I would say vicious, because the difference between this house and the other two is that I have been physically attacked here. And I can't, other than just, regular touching and, hair and, whatever, in this house, I have been physically assaulted. And it was the most terrifying experience of my life.